The valet at the Peninsula in Beverly Hills had seen money walk through those glass doors his whole career. He had never seen a room go silent, the way it went silent the night Imani Okafor stepped out of a matte black Maybach with a man whose name nobody could say out loud. She was wearing a forest green dress she'd bought secondhand 11 months ago, back when $11 decided whether she ate lunch. Her hands weren't shaking. That was the part she'd remember later, that her hands, for the first time in 3 years, were perfectly still. Across the ballroom, under a chandelier that probably cost more than her old apartment building, Marcus Bell was laughing. He was always laughing. He had the kind of laugh men practice in mirrors, loud enough to make a room turn, designed to make whoever stood beside him feel small by comparison. Tonight that someone was his fiancée, a marketing director named Brooke, and the joke, Imani could read his lips from 40 feet away. The joke was about her. Look who crawled back. Look who she dragged along to feel important. Marcus had laughed at a lot of things during the 4 years they were together. He'd laughed when she said she wanted to finish her accounting certification. He'd laughed when she cried after her mother's funeral, because crying was a lot. He'd laughed the day he moved out, taking the couch she'd paid for, telling her she'd never find anyone who'd put up with her. So when she walked in tonight on the arm of a stranger, Marcus did what Marcus always did. He pointed. He leaned toward Brooke. He laughed. The man beside Imani turned his head. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. There was a particular quality to the way the room reorganized itself around him, the way 2 men near the bar set down their drinks, the way the event coordinator suddenly found somewhere else to be, the way the music seemed to lower itself without anyone touching a dial. He was not a large man. He was maybe 5'10" in shoes that had been made by hand in a workshop in Seoul. But power, real power, isn't about size. It's about how many people in a room are afraid of you and how completely they hide it. His name was Do-hyun Seo, and in certain rooms in Los Angeles, Seoul, and 3 cities in between, that name was the last thing people heard before their lives changed. Marcus's laugh died in his throat. He didn't know why at first. He just felt it, the way an animal feels weather coming. He looked at the man, then at Imani, then back at the man, and something primitive in him understood that he had made a mistake he could not yet measure. Imani felt Do-hyun's hand settle, light as a promise, against the small of her bag. "Smile," he murmured, just for her. "You earned this room. Don't give it back to him." So she smiled. But to understand how Imani Okafor ended up here, in a borrowed green dress, on the arm of one of the most dangerous men on 2 continents, watching the man who broke her finally stop laughing, we need to go back. Back to the version of her who counted change in a bus shelter. Back to the lie she believed for 3 years. Back to the night a single locked door changed everything. If you've ever made yourself small so someone else could feel big, if you've ever been laughed at for daring to want more, dismissed for being too much, or told you'd never make it on your own, this story is for you. Because this isn't really a story about a dangerous man with a dangerous name. Do-hyun Seo matters, but he's not the point. The point is the woman who learned that the most dangerous thing in any room isn't the man everyone fears. It's the woman who finally stops being afraid of herself. I want you to ask yourself something as we go. Who taught you that your needs were a burden? Hold that question. We're going to answer it together. And if you believe a person's worth was never something anyone else had the right to decide, do me a favor right now. Hit subscribe and drop the word worthy in the comments. I read every single one, and I want to know you're here, now. Let me take you back to a woman who didn't know any of this yet. A woman who, 11 months before that ballroom, was kneeling on a cold tile floor at 2 a.m., counting quarters. Imani Okafor learned to apologize before she learned to ask. She was 31 years old, and she could trace the habit all the way back to a kitchen in Oakland, where her father, a good man, a tired man, would come home from double shifts and need quiet. So she learned quiet. She learned to read a room before she entered it, to soften her wants until they fit into the spaces other people left empty. By the time she met Marcus Bell at a mutual friend's barbecue in Inglewood, she was so practiced at shrinking that he mistook it for ease. "You're so low maintenance," he told her on their third date, and she'd glowed at it like a compliment. It took her years to understand that low maintenance was the word men used for women who'd been trained not to expect anything. Marcus was a regional sales manager for a medical device company. He had a good car, a confident handshake, and the particular charisma of a man who'd never once doubted he deserved the room he was standing in. For a while, his certainty felt like shelter. Imani had spent her whole life unsure. Here was a man who was sure enough for both of them. She moved into his apartment in Culver City 8 months in. She told herself it was practical. The truth was, she'd given up her own lease because Marcus said it was wasteful to pay 2 rents. And somehow, when the dust settled, the apartment they shared was the one with his name on it, and the one she'd given up was hers. She paid for things. That was the arrangement, though nobody ever called it that. She covered groceries because she liked to cook. She covered the internet because she worked from home more. When his car needed a transmission, she had the savings, and he had a story about a bonus that was definitely coming, and the bonus never came, and somehow that conversation never happened again. By year 3, she was contributing 60% of a household where her name appeared on 0 of the assets, and she'd talked herself into believing this was love, because Marcus could be wonderful. That was the trap of him. He was never cruel for long enough to be obviously cruel. He'd cut her down on a Tuesday and surprise her with her favorite Ethiopian takeout on Wednesday, and the relief of the good days erased the math of the bad ones. Her dream, the small, stubborn dream she kept folded up small enough that even Marcus couldn't quite reach it, was to become a CPA. She had the aptitude. In high school in Oakland, she'd been the kid who balanced the Booster Club's books, who found the $400 error nobody else could. She loved the honesty of numbers. Numbers didn't gaslight you. A column either added up or it didn't. She'd enrolled in a certification program twice. The first time, Marcus had a rough quarter and needed her emotional support, and her study nights became his venting nights. The second time, she'd actually started, and he'd laughed. "Babe," he said with that grin, "you're 30. You really gonna start over? Accountants are nerds with no personality. That's not you." A pause. "Besides, who's gonna keep this place running if you're always studying?" She withdrew, ate the tuition loss, told herself it was the wrong time. Her best friend Renata saw it all. Renata was a paralegal, sharp-tongued and loyal, and she'd never liked Marcus. "He's not building a life with you, Mani," she said once over wine. "He's building a life on you. There's a difference, and one day you're gonna feel which one it is." Imani had defended him. She always defended him. The break, when it came, was small and devastating in the way real breaks are. Imani's mother, the only family she had left after her father's stroke 2 years prior, got sick, pancreatic, fast. Imani spent her savings, the savings she'd been quietly setting aside in an account she hadn't told Marcus about, on flights to Oakland, on hospice, on a casket. She held her mother's hand at the end. She came home hollowed out, and Marcus, 3 days after the funeral, complained that she'd been distant. "I get that you're sad," he said, "but how long is this going to be a thing? I feel like I lost my girlfriend too, you know?" Something in Imani went very quiet then. Not loud, quiet. The quiet she knew from childhood, except this time it wasn't fear. It was the first cold seed of a different feeling, one she didn't have a name for yet. 2 months later, Marcus moved out. He'd met Brooke. He told Imani over a text, and when he came for his things, he took the couch she'd paid for, the TV she'd paid for, and left her with a lease in his name that he'd already told the landlord she'd be taking over. "You'll be fine," he said at the door, almost kindly. "Honestly, you should thank me. I held you back. Now you can go figure out whatever it is you're trying to figure out." And then, the line that would echo, "Just don't expect anybody else to put up with you the way I did." He laughed. Of course he laughed. Then he was gone. Imani sat on the floor of an apartment that was suddenly hers in name and debt only, surrounded by the pale rectangles on the wall where his pictures used to hang, and she did the math. She always did the math. She had $412. Rent was $1,900. She had a part-time bookkeeping gig that paid the bills if nothing went wrong, and everything was about to go wrong. That was the lie she'd believed for 3 years, laid bare on a hardwood floor. That being needed was the same as being loved, and that her worth was a thing she had to earn by disappearing. She didn't cry. She'd find that strange later, that she didn't cry. Instead, at 2 a.m., she emptied the change jar onto the tile and counted it, quarter by quarter, because she needed to know exactly how alone she was. $11.75 in coins. She had no idea that 4 blocks away, in a corner office above a restaurant that never seemed to have customers, a man named Do-hyun Seo was about to need a bookkeeper who could keep a secret. The job listing didn't say what it really was. They never do. Bookkeeper needed. Hospitality group, discretion required. Cash comfortable a plus. Excellent compensation. Renata found it and forwarded it with 3 exclamation points and a warning. Looks too good. Probably a scam. But the number's local and they pay weekly. Just go meet them. What's the worst that happens? The address was a restaurant in Koreatown called Hwanghae, a narrow, beautiful place with cedar walls, and a host who looked at Imani's second-hand blazer, with eyes that missed nothing and judged nothing. She was led past the dining room, up a flight of stairs, into an office that smelled of green tea and old paper. The man behind the desk did not stand the way men usually stood when a woman entered. There was no performance to it. He simply rose, inclined his head slightly, and gestured to the chair across from him. He was lean, maybe 40, dressed in charcoal so well cut it looked like a second skin. His face was calm in a way that was almost unsettling, the calm of deep water. Ms. Okafor. His English carried the faint music of somewhere else. Thank you for coming. I'm Do-hyun Seo. She'd expected an interview. Instead, he slid a single ledger across the desk. Before we talk, he said, I'd like you to find the mistake. She blinked. The mistake? There's one. Take your time. It was a test. She understood that immediately, and something in her, the part Marcus had laughed at, the part that loved the honesty of numbers, woke up. She opened the ledger. It was a restaurant's books, by all appearances ordinary. Vendor payments, payroll, linen service, produce. It took her 19 minutes. The error was buried 4 pages deep. A produce vendor invoiced monthly, except 1 month the payment had gone out twice, 8 days apart. Same amount, same vendor. But the second one had a transposed digit in the account number that routed it somewhere subtly different. Easy to miss. Almost designed to be missed. This one. She turned the ledger and pointed. You paid your produce vendor twice in March, except the second payment didn't actually go to your produce vendor. The routing's off by 2 digits. Somebody skimmed $11,000 and hid it behind a duplicate. The office was very quiet. Do-hyun Seo looked at her for a long moment. Then, for the first time, something moved behind the calm. Not a smile exactly, but the ghost of one. 14 people have looked at that ledger, he said softly. You're the 3rd to find it, and the 1st to find it in under an hour. He closed the book. The job is yours if you want it, if. The compensation is $2,000 a week, paid Fridays, in cash if you prefer. You'll keep the books for several businesses under one umbrella. You'll see things that don't add up neatly, and you will never, ever talk about what you see outside this room. $2,000 a week. The number didn't feel real. It was more than 4 times what she made now. Her rent, her debt, the wreckage Marcus left, all of it suddenly had a shape that could be solved. But she wasn't a fool. The cedar walls, the empty dining room that still somehow ran, the men by the door who watched her hands and not her face, the test designed to find someone who could detect exactly the kind of theft that happens in businesses that move a lot of cash. Mr. Seo, she said carefully, what is it I'd actually be keeping books for? He didn't insult her by lying. That, she'd learn, was the thing about him. He could be many things, but not, with her, a liar. Restaurants. Real ones. They make real food, real money. A logistics company. A property group. A pause. And some arrangements that the businesses make possible. I won't ask you to commit a crime, Ms. Okafor. I'll ask you to keep honest books for a complicated life, and to understand that some pages are not yours to question." He leaned forward slightly. "I find that people who have been underestimated their whole lives are very good at noticing what other people miss, and very good at discretion. Tell me, am I wrong about you?" She thought about the $11.75. She thought about Marcus laughing at the door. She thought about her mother's voice years ago. "Baby, the world doesn't hand brave women easy choices. It hands them the choice between a small safe life and a real one." "You're not wrong," she said. "Good." He stood. "One more thing. You should know who I am so you can decide with your eyes open. The people who work for me are loyal because I am fair, not because I am kind. There's a difference. I don't punish honesty. I do not tolerate betrayal. As long as you never confuse the two, you and I will get along." She took the job. She told herself it was the money. The truth, which she wouldn't admit for weeks, was that for the first time since her mother died, someone had handed her a problem and assumed she was the smartest person who could solve it. She had no idea that the duplicate payment she'd just found was connected to a man who would, within a month, threaten everything she'd just begun to build. She had no idea that Do-hyun Seo had been looking for that thief for a year, and she had no idea that the thief had a name she already knew. The thief's name was Calvin Drake. She learned it 3 weeks in, on a Thursday, when Do-hyun called her into the office with a folder and a stillness that had something colder in it than usual. By then, Imani had found her footing. She'd reorganized the books of 4 businesses, untangled 2 years of sloppy entries, and identified roughly $40,000 that had been quietly leaking out of the produce and linen accounts through a web of duplicate payments and ghost vendors. She'd presented it all in clean spreadsheets, color-coded, sourced. Do-hyun had studied her work the way other men studied her body, and it had unnerved her how good that felt. "You found the channel," he said now, sliding the folder across. "I found the man. I need you to tell me if your numbers agree with my eyes." She opened it. A photograph of a man in his 50s, silver-haired, expensive suit. A name, Calvin Drake. A title, he ran a consulting firm that, according to the documents beneath the photo, had been embedded as a vendor in 3 of Do-hyun's businesses for 14 months. And then she saw the second page, and her stomach dropped through the floor. Calvin Drake's consulting firm had one major client besides Do-hyun's group, a medical device company, the same medical device company where Marcus Bell was a regional sales manager. "I know this company," she said, her voice strange in her own ears. Do-hyun went very still. "How?" "My ex-boyfriend works there, Marcus Bell. We were together 4 years. She made herself look up. "I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know there was any connection. The job listing, the timing, I thought it was luck." She watched him decide whether to believe her. She watched the deep water of his face, and she understood that her life might genuinely depend on the next 10 seconds. "I believe you," he said finally, "because if you'd been planted, you wouldn't have found the theft. A plant protects the channel. You exposed it." He exhaled slowly. "But this changes the shape of the problem. Sit down. You should understand what you've walked into." What she'd walked into was this. Calvin Drake wasn't just skimming money. He was building a case. For 18 months, he'd been quietly documenting Do-hyun's businesses, the legitimate ones and the ones that weren't, and feeding pieces of it to a federal task force in exchange for immunity on his own, much larger frauds. The duplicate payments weren't only theft. They were a paper trail Drake was constructing, designed to look like Do-hyun's money laundering, with Drake's own fingerprints carefully scrubbed off. "He's going to hand them a story," Do-hyun said, "and in that story, I am the monster, and he is the brave whistleblower who infiltrated me at great personal risk. The books you've been keeping, the ones that prove the theft was his, are the only thing that breaks his story. Without them, his version is the only version." "Then we give the books to the right people," Imani said. "We prove he stole. We prove he's lying." A thin, tired smile. "It's not that simple. To prove he stole from me, I have to explain what he was stealing from. Some of those accounts can survive daylight, some cannot. He looked at her directly. And here is the part you need to hear clearly, Imani. The moment Calvin Drake learns there's a bookkeeper who has reconstructed his entire scheme, a bookkeeper who can testify that the fraud points to him, not to me, you become the most dangerous person to his freedom, and the most disposable. The word disposable hung in the cedar-scented air. He'll come for the books, she said slowly, and for whoever made them. Yes. And there's a connection between him and Marcus. Marcus's company is his cover. Yes, which means, Do-hyun said, your ex-boyfriend is either an unwitting prop in a fraud he doesn't understand, or he's in deeper than you ever knew, and the man who broke your heart has been this whole time, 1 degree of separation from a man who would not hesitate to make you disappear. Imani sat in the quiet office above the restaurant that served real food and ran on secrets, and she felt the entire architecture of her old life rearrange itself. The breakup hadn't been random. The job hadn't been luck. She'd spent 3 years thinking she was small, and now she was holding the one set of books that could destroy a man who hurt people for money. And that man knew, or soon would, exactly where to find her. The conflict had stopped being about a broken heart. Now it was about whether she'd live to fix one. You have 3 options, Do-hyun said, and I'm going to give you all of them honestly, because you've earned that, and because a choice made in the dark isn't a choice. It's a trap. Outside, the Koreatown afternoon went on. Delivery trucks, school kids, the ordinary world that had no idea what got decided in rooms like this one. Option 1. He held up a finger. You walk away tonight. I pay you a year's salary. You leave Los Angeles. You start over somewhere Drake can't connect to me. You'll be safe, most likely. But you'll be running, and you'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder. And the books, your work, get buried, and Drake probably wins. He goes free, I go to prison or worse, and a man who steals from working people to save his own skin gets a clean exit. He let that sit. It's the safe choice. I won't think less of you for it. Option 2. You give me everything and disappear from the story. I take the books, I handle Drake my own way, the way men like me have always handled men like Drake. You never testify, never surface, never risk a courtroom. It's faster. It's also a crime, and you'd be an accessory to it whether your name is on it or not. I won't make you part of that. I'm offering it because pretending it isn't an option would be a lie, and I don't lie to you. His jaw tightened. But I'll tell you plainly, I'm trying to become a man who chooses option 3, so I'd rather you didn't choose this one for me. And option 3? We do it in the light. He leaned forward, and for the first time she saw something underneath the calm. Not fear, but the weight of a man making a turn his whole life had pointed away from. I have spent 4 years moving my legitimate businesses into the daylight. Slowly, quietly. The restaurants, the property group. They're real, and they're clean, and they're the future I'm building so that the next generation of people who work for me don't have to do what I did. Calvin Drake threatens that future, because if he hands the federal task force his fiction, it doesn't matter how much I've cleaned up. The story sticks. He slid a card across the desk. A name. Adaeze Nwosu, attorney at law, federal white-collar defense. A woman, Nigerian by the name, with a downtown address. Option 3 is this. We take what you've built, the books that prove Drake is the thief and the liar, and we give them to her. She's the best in the city. She's incorruptible, and she does not work for me. She works for the truth, which sometimes overlaps with my interests and sometimes does not. You'd work with her. You'd reconstruct everything, document everything, and when the time comes, you'd testify that the fraud points to Calvin Drake, in open court, under your own name. The room held its breath. That's the dangerous one, Imani said. That's the dangerous one, he agreed. Drake will know exactly who you are. He'll try to discredit you, frighten you, buy you, or worse. I'll protect you with everything I have, and I have a great deal, but I can't promise you safety. I can only promise you the truth, and a fair fight, and that you will never face it alone." He paused. "I'm not offering to rescue you, Imani. I learned a long time ago that rescuing people just teaches them they can't save themselves. I'm offering you tools, the lawyer, the protection, the resources, the choice, and the consequence. Stay yours." It was the most honest thing a man had ever said to her. Marcus had offered her shelter and made her pay for it in pieces of herself. Do-hyun was offering her a war, and being honest that it was won. She thought about the $11.75. She thought about all the times she'd made herself small to keep a peace that was never really peace. She thought about her mother, the choice between a small safe life and a real one. "If I testify," she said, "and we win, what happens to your businesses, the ones that can't survive daylight?" Something passed across his face, respect maybe, that she'd asked the question that protected him. "I shut them down," he said simply. "I've been planning to for 2 years. Drake forced the timeline, that's all. The man thinks he's cornering me. He doesn't understand that I've been looking for a reason to walk through this door, and a person I could trust to hold it open." He held her gaze. "You're the reason. You're the person. But only if you choose it." "What are the terms?" Imani asked. "If we're partners in this, and that's what this is, I want to know the terms. No more arrangements I find out about later. I've had enough of those." For the first time, Do-hyun Seo smiled fully. It transformed him. "The terms," he said. "You're paid through the end of this regardless of outcome. If we win, I set you up, properly, in the light, your name on real things. A consulting practice, your CPA, whatever you want to build. If it goes wrong, I get you out, no matter the cost to me. You can quit at any moment, and the protection holds anyway." He extended his hand across the desk. "And one term from me. You stop apologizing for taking up space. In this fight, I need the woman who found the mistake in 19 minutes, not the woman who learned to disappear. Can you give me her?" Imani looked at his hand. Then she shook it. "She's already here," she said. Adesina Nwosu's office was the opposite of Do-hyun's. All glass and light, 41 floors above downtown. No secrets in the architecture at all. She was a tall woman in a tailored suit the color of dried blood, with reading glasses she used like a weapon, pushing them down her nose to look at you when she wanted you to feel the full weight of her attention. She looked at Imani's books for 2 hours without speaking. Then she took the glasses off. "This is the cleanest forensic reconstruction I've seen from someone without a forensic accounting credential," she said. "Which raises a question. Why don't you have the credential?" "A man told me accounting was for people with no personality," Imani said. "I believed him for too long." Adesi's mouth twitched. We'll be fixing that." She tapped the books. "Here's the situation, and I'm going to be as blunt as Mr. Seo clearly was, because you respond to it. Calvin Drake has been talking to a federal task force for 14 months. He's positioned himself as a cooperating witness against an organized criminal enterprise. The problem for him, the problem he doesn't know exists yet, is that your records prove the financial crimes he's describing were committed by him, routed through the businesses, not by the businesses. You don't just poke a hole in his story. You invert it. You make him the defendant." "So we go to the task force first," Imani said. "We go to the task force first. We get there before he finishes building his fiction, and we hand them a better, truer, more documented story. We make him radioactive." Ades leaned back. "But understand what this costs you. The second we walk into that building, your name is in it. Drake will know. And Calvin Drake did not get to where he is by losing gracefully." The first boundary Imani set was a small one, and it terrified her more than the federal building. She called Marcus, not because she missed him, because Adaz needed to know how deep his company's involvement went, and there was exactly one person who could tell her whether Marcus was a knowing participant or a useful idiot, and that was Marcus himself, who could never resist explaining how important he was. He answered on the third ring, surprised, then smug. Well, knew you'd call eventually. Brooke's gonna love this. I need to ask you about Calvin Drake, Imani said. A pause, a real one. The smugness faltered. What do you know about Calvin? And there it was. Calvin, first name, familiar. He consults for your company, she said evenly. I'm doing some bookkeeping work and his firm came up. I'm just trying to understand the relationship. Yeah, no, you need to stay away from that. Marcus's voice had dropped, lost its performance. Seriously, Imani, whatever bookkeeping gig you got, if Calvin Drake's name is in it, you walk. That man. He stopped himself. Look, I don't know what you're into, but Calvin is not someone you want knowing your name. Trust me. For once in your life, just listen to me. The old Imani would have listened, would have shrunk, would have apologized for asking. The new one heard something else entirely. She heard a man who knew exactly who Calvin Drake was, who was afraid of him, and who had, she understood with sudden cold clarity, almost certainly used her at some point in their relationship as a quiet convenience, the bonus that was coming. The cash he sometimes had and sometimes didn't. The way he'd steered her away from anything that might make her look too closely at money. Marcus, she said, did you ever bring Calvin Drake's business to our apartment? Did you ever move money through accounts that had my name anywhere near them? The silence on the line was an answer. I have to go, he said quickly. Don't call me again. And Imani, I mean it. Drop whatever this is. You're gonna get yourself hurt. Click. She sat with the dead phone in her hand, and instead of fear, she felt something clean and bright move through her. He used me. He laughed at me and he used me, and he's still trying to make me small even now, even scared. She called Adaze back and told her everything. He's a knowing participant, Adaze said. Low level, frightened, but knowing, which is good for us. Frightened men talk. We may be able to flip him. A beat. Are you all right? That can't have been easy. It was the easiest call I've made in years, Imani said, and was surprised to find it was true. Over the next 10 days, she barely slept. She worked with Adiz's forensic team, cross-referencing every transaction, building an exhibit so airtight that even a hostile examiner couldn't crack it. She learned the language of the law, the difference between what was true and what was provable. She found 3 more ghost vendors Drake had buried. She tracked a single thread of $40,000 across 19 months and 4 shell companies, and pinned it, finally, to a personal account in Calvin Drake's wife's maiden name. And on the 11th day, the threats began. A car parked outside her apartment overnight. A man she didn't recognize, smiling, who happened to be at her coffee shop 2 mornings running. A voicemail from a blocked number, a calm male voice. You're a smart girl. Smart girls know which numbers to forget. Forget these. She didn't run. She forwarded the voicemail to Adaze, who forwarded it to the task force, where it became Exhibit something or other in a growing file titled Witness Intimidation. And she called Do-Yun. He found me, she said. I know, he said. There are 2 of my people on your street right now. The man at your coffee shop won't be back. Imani. A pause, and his voice changed, lost its calm, became something more human. You can still stop. Say the word. I'm not stopping, she said. I just wanted you to know I'm not scared. A long silence, then quietly. I know. That's what frightens me. If this story is hitting somewhere real for you, if you've ever found out that the person who made you feel small was using you the whole time, type, I see it now in the comments. And if you want to see Calvin Drake walk into that federal building thinking he's the predator, not knowing he's the prey, subscribe, because part 8 is the one you've been waiting for. 3 days later, Adaze Nwosu and Imani Okafor walked into the federal building downtown, carrying 4 boxes of evidence and 1 bookkeeper's complete reconstruction of Calvin Drake's 18-month fraud. They had gotten there first. Calvin Drake didn't understand what had happened to him until it was far too late to stop it. For 14 months, he'd been the federal task force's prized cooperating witness. the insider who'd bravely embedded himself in Do Yun-seo's organization and was prepared to testify to its crimes. He had immunity discussions underway. He had a narrative. He had, he believed, the United States government in his corner. What he didn't have was the books. The hearing that mattered most wasn't a dramatic trial with a jury and a verdict. It was something quieter and, in its way, far more devastating. A proffer session in a windowless conference room, where Calvin Drake sat with his expensive lawyer to give his cooperating testimony, and where the assistant U.S. attorney slid a folder across the table and said, "Before we go further, Mr. Drake, I'd like you to explain these." The folder was Imani's work. Imani wasn't in the room. She learned what happened from Adaze, who had it from a contact in the U.S. Attorney's office, and who told it to her over coffee with the satisfied precision of a surgeon describing a successful operation. "They walked him through it transaction by transaction," Adaze said. "Every duplicate payment, every ghost vendor. The $40,000 traced to his wife's maiden name account. The story he'd been telling them for 14 months, that the fraud was Sio's and he was just a witness to it. It didn't survive contact with your reconstruction. Because the money didn't flow the way he said it did. It flowed to him. You proved he wasn't a witness to the crime. He was the crime." "What did he do?" Imani asked. "What guilty men do when the floor opens up?" Adaze's smile was thin and cold. He turned on his lawyer. Then he tried to renegotiate. Then he tried to claim he'd been coerced. None of it worked because the books don't lie and you didn't either. His immunity's gone. They're charging him with wire fraud, money laundering, and, my personal favorite, making false statements to federal investigators. Each of those false statements is its own felony, and there are a lot of them. But the public victory, the one Imani would carry, came 2 weeks later, and it had Marcus's fingerprints on it. Adaze had flipped him, exactly as she'd predicted. Frightened men talk. Faced with his own exposure, Marcus Bell agreed to cooperate, and his cooperation required a sworn deposition, and that deposition required that he sit across a conference table from the forensic accountant who had built the case, Imani. She walked into that room in a suit she'd bought new, her first new suit in 3 years, navy, sharp, bought with money she'd earned with her own mind. She set down her files. She looked at Marcus, who looked older and smaller and frightened, the laugh long gone from his face. "Imani," he said, when I told you to stay away, I was trying to protect you, I swear." "You were trying to protect yourself," she said without heat. "But thank you for the warning. It told me everything I needed to know." She walked him through his own role with the same calm precision she brought to a ledger, where the money moved, which accounts, when he'd known. She didn't gloat. She didn't need to. The gloating would have made it about him, and she had finally, completely, stopped making things about Marcus Bell. At the end, as the lawyers gathered papers, he tried one last time. The grin flickered ghostly. "You know, you're different. This new you. Honestly, it's kind of..." He reached for the old move, the cutting compliment. "It's kind of a lot." Imani stood, gathered her files, and looked at him for what she knew would be the last time. "It is," she said. "It's exactly enough." And she walked out without looking back, and the door closed on 4 years of being made small, and she did not feel the loss of him at all. She felt the size of the room she now took up, the full, unapologetic size of it. Calvin Drake would plead out 11 weeks later, 12 years, no parole eligibility for 8. The federal task force would quietly thank an unnamed forensic source. And Do Yun-seo, true to his word, would begin the slow, public dismantling of the businesses that couldn't survive daylight, folding their workers into the legitimate ones, walking through the door Imani had held open for him. Justice, it turned out, didn't look like a thunderclap. It looked like a woman in a navy suit, leaving a room with her head up. She thought the hard part was over. The hard part is never the part you brace for. Renata came to her apartment on a Sunday, the same Renata who'd warned her about Marcus, who'd forwarded the job listing, who'd been her one constant. But there was something off in her friend's face, an apology already forming. I need to ask you something, Renata said, and I need you to not be mad. It came out in pieces. Renata's brother Tobias was in trouble, real trouble, the kind with a court date and a lawyer they couldn't afford. And Renata had heard through the grapevine of mutual friends that Imani was now connected, that she had access to serious money and serious people, that she worked for someone important. I just thought, Renata said, maybe you could ask him. Mr. Seo, just make Tobias's problem go away. People like that, they can do that, right? One phone call? She reached for Imani's hand. You're the only person I know who could help. And after everything I did for you, finding you that job, being there when Marcus left, I just figured, you owe me. That's not a bad thing. That's just what family does. There it was. You owe me. The old language, the arithmetic of obligation that Imani had lived inside her entire life, where love was a ledger and she was always, somehow, in debt. A year ago, she'd have said yes before Renata finished the sentence. She'd have made herself small, made the call, taken on the risk and the guilt and the cost, because being needed felt like being loved, and she didn't know how to tell the difference. She knew the difference now. Renata, she said gently, I love you. You did help me, and I'm grateful, and I always will be. But I'm not going to ask Do-Yoon to make a court case disappear. Renata's face hardened. Why not? You won't even ask. Because that's exactly the kind of thing he's trying to stop doing. Because making problems disappear is how innocent people get hurt and guilty people go free, and I just spent 11 months of my life proving that. And because... She took a breath. Because the version of me who'd do anything anybody asked, who'd risk everything to feel needed, who'd confuse I owe you with I love you, she almost didn't survive the last 3 years. I'm not going back to her, not even for you. So that's it. You get powerful and suddenly you're too good for the people who carried you. The words were designed to land in the oldest wound. Too good, too much, selfish. The exact knives that had kept Imani small her whole life. She felt them fully. And then she let them pass through her, the way you let cold water pass over your hand, knowing it can't actually hold you. I'm not too good for you, Imani said, and her voice didn't shake. I love you, and I want to help Tobias the right way. I'll pay for a real lawyer, a good one, the best I can afford, no strings. I'll sit with you in that courtroom every single day. I'll do everything a friend should do. What I won't do is the one thing that would cost both of us our integrity and probably wouldn't even work. She paused. That's not me abandoning you. That's me loving you without disappearing. If you can't tell the difference, that's something you and I have to work on. But I'm not changing the answer. Renata stared at her for a long moment, and then, slowly, against her own anger, her eyes filled. When did you get like this? She whispered. It wasn't an accusation anymore. It was something closer to awe. In a cedar-walled office, Imani said, when a dangerous man told me to stop apologizing for taking up space. A small, real smile. Let me get Tobias a good lawyer, Ren. Let me help you the way that actually helps. Renata broke then, the anger collapsing into the kind of crying that comes from being loved correctly when you expected to be either rescued or rejected. They sat on Imani's floor, the same floor where, 11 months earlier, Imani had counted $11 in quarters, and Imani held her best friend, and held the boundary at the same time, and learned that the two things were not opposites after all. She found Tobias a lawyer the next morning, a good one. She paid for it out of her own account, money she'd earned. No favors called in, no shadows attached. It was the most expensive thing she'd ever bought, and the freest she'd ever felt buying anything. The certificate came in a plain envelope, and Imani held it for a full minute before she opened it, because she knew that the moment she did, a 31-year-old promise she'd made to herself in an Oakland high school would finally come true. Certified public accountant, State of California, Imani Adaizi Okafor. She'd added the middle name herself on the application, Adaizi, after the lawyer who'd shown her what a woman in full looked like. It meant King's daughter, royalty, worth that wasn't granted by anyone and couldn't be taken away. She'd looked it up the night she chose it, and she'd cried. The good kind. The kind she hadn't been able to manage when Marcus left. She'd done it the hard way, while working, while testifying, while sleeping with one eye open during the months Calvin Drake's people circled. She'd sat for the exam sections one at a time over the year, in a beige testing center that smelled of hand sanitizer, and she'd passed every one on the first attempt. The same mind that found the mistake in 19 minutes finally pointed at her own future. But the CPA wasn't even the real victory. The real victory was what she did with it. She didn't take a job. She'd had offers. Adesi had personally recommended her to 2 firms, and Do-hyun had, of course, offered to set her up, which she'd appreciated and declined. Because the whole point, the entire arc of the thing, was that she needed to build something that was hers, on her own foundation, with her own name on the door. Okafor Forensic and Advisory. She rented a small office, not in Koreatown, not downtown, but in a renovated building in Leimert Park, in the heart of Black Los Angeles, 2 blocks from a jazz club her father used to love. 1 room, 1 desk, 1 nameplate she'd had made, and then sat in her car holding for 10 minutes before she could bring herself to mount it on the door. Her first client was a church bookkeeper who suspected the building fund was being skimmed. Her second was a small construction firm owned by a woman who'd been told by 3 male accountants that her instincts about her own losses were probably nothing. Imani found the something. She found it in 11 minutes. Word moved the way it moves in tight communities, through aunties and barbershops and the quiet network of women who'd been underestimated and were tired of it. Within 4 months, she had a wait list. Within 7, she hired her first employee, a sharp young woman named Zola, fresh out of school, who reminded Imani so much of her former self that she made it her mission to ensure Zola never learned to apologize for being smart. She paid off the apartment lease Marcus had stuck her with. Then she did something better. She left that apartment entirely, the one full of pale rectangles where his pictures used to hang, and bought a small condo with a window that caught the morning light. The down payment came from money she had earned with her own mind, in her own name, doing work that helped people the law was supposed to protect, and often didn't. The night she got the keys, she sat on the floor of the empty new place. She liked floors, she'd decided. Floors were where she did her best thinking, and she did the math one more time, out of old habit, out of something like ceremony. 11 months ago, $11.75 in quarters. Now, a CPA license, a business with her name on it, an employee depending on her, a savings account that was actually hers, a best friend whose brother she'd helped the right way, and a quiet pride that no one had given her and no one could revoke. She had not been rescued. That was the thing she kept coming back to. Do-hyun had offered tools, never rescue, and she'd built every bit of this herself, with her own 2 hands and the mind a man had once told her to be ashamed of. She thought about Marcus's voice at the door. Just don't expect anybody else to put up with you the way I did? She laughed out loud, alone in her empty, bright apartment. She didn't need anybody to put up with her. She'd found someone who'd already proven he could simply stand beside her, and that was a different thing entirely. Which brought her, finally, to the question she'd been avoiding for almost a year. What, exactly, was she to Do-hyun Seo? They had never named it. That was the strange, careful thing about the 2 of them. 11 months of the most intense partnership of her life, and they had never once put a word on what they were. It had started as employer and employee, then become something more like co-conspirators, then something that didn't have a clean label at all. He had protected her without smothering her. He had handed her tools and stepped back. He had told her to stop apologizing for taking up space, and then, and this was the part that mattered, he had given her the space, and never once tried to fill it himself. But Imani had learned this year to stop avoiding the columns that didn't add up. So one evening she went to Hwanghae, the restaurant where it all began, which was thriving now, full of actual customers, the daylight businesses doing exactly what he'd promised they would. She found him at his old table. The office upstairs was a real office now. The men who used to watch hands instead of faces were mostly gone, retired or transitioned into the legitimate operations. He looked, she thought, lighter than the man she'd met. Like someone who'd set down a weight he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it wasn't part of his body. "I need to ask you something," she said, sitting across from him. "And I need you to be as honest with me as you've always been, even when it would be easier to lie." "I've never lied to you," he said. "I'm not going to start now that it matters most." She felt that now that it matters most land somewhere deep. "What are we?" she asked. 11 months, and I genuinely don't know. And I'm done not knowing things. I'm done with arrangements I find out the shape of later." Do-hyun was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, the deep-water calm had a current under it she'd never seen. "I'll tell you what I know," he said. "I know that I built my entire life on being the most controlled man in any room, on never needing anyone, because needing people is how they get leverage on you. I learned that very young, and it kept me alive, and it cost me every soft thing a life is supposed to have." He turned his teacup a quarter turn on its saucer, a small, uncharacteristic fidget. "And then a woman found a mistake in my books in 19 minutes, and looked me in the eye, and asked me the terms instead of the price. And somewhere in the last 11 months, I stopped being afraid of the leverage, because you never once reached for it." "That's not an answer," Imani said softly. "That's a feeling." "You're right." A breath. "Here is the answer. I'm in love with you, Imani Okafor. I have been for some time. And I've said nothing, because the entire architecture of who you became this year was built on the principle that no man would rescue you, define you, or fill your space. And I refused to be the man who undid that the moment you finished building it. I would rather love you silently for the rest of my life than make you small to keep you." He met her eyes. "So I waited. For you to be so completely yourself that whatever you chose, you'd be choosing it from strength, not need. That's the only way I'd ever want you to choose anything, especially me." Imani sat with that. The most powerful man she'd ever met had just made himself completely, dangerously vulnerable, had handed her the leverage he'd spent his life guarding against, and had done it specifically because he trusted she would never use it. It was the exact opposite of everything Marcus had ever been. Marcus had offered her shelter and charged her in secret, the cost of her own self. Do-hyun had offered her a war, an honest one, and then stood guard over the very independence that meant she might not need him at all. "I have my own business now," she said. "My own name on the door, my own money. I built it myself. I know, it's the most beautiful thing I've ever watched a person do. So I want to be very clear about what this would be." She leaned forward, and now it was her turn to be the most honest person in the room. "Not a rescue, not an arrangement, not me disappearing into your world or you into mine. Two whole people who chose each other from strength, equals. I keep my door, you keep yours. And we decide, on purpose, again and again, to stand on the same side. Partners," he said, "not dependency." "Partners," she agreed. "I won't make myself small for you, ever, not even a little." "Imani." He said her name like it was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. "If you ever make yourself small for me, I'll have failed at the only thing I actually want, which is to watch you take up every inch of room you're owed." The ghost of his old calm returned, but warmer now. "I didn't fall for the woman who needed saving. There was never a version of you that needed saving. I fell for the woman who found the mistake." And that, not a rescue, not a fairy tale, but two armored people choosing to set the armor down at the same time, in the light, on equal ground. That was the beginning of the only kind of love either of them could have survived. Which brings us finally back to that ballroom. To the green dress and the steady hands. To Marcus, mid-laugh, not yet understanding. So here we are, the peninsula, the chandelier. Marcus Bell pointing across the room, his laugh dying in his throat as Do-hyun Seo turns his head. And what Marcus sees in that moment isn't a dangerous man come to threaten him. The danger is real, but it's not the point. What Marcus sees, finally, is the woman beside him. He sees Imani Okafor standing at full height in a second-hand green dress she wears like armor, with a CPA license and a business with her name on the door, and a savings account that's hers, and a love she chose from strength instead of need. He sees the woman he told would never find anyone to put up with her. He sees that she never needed anyone to put up with her at all. She didn't come to that ballroom to win him back, or to make him jealous, or even, really, to make him stop laughing. She came because Do-yoon was being honored that night for the foundation he'd built, the real, legitimate daylight work. And she was his partner, his equal, and she had every right to that room. Marcus being there was an accident. The accident was just that. For once, the universe let her watch the exact moment he understood what he'd thrown away. He stopped laughing first, but she'd already stopped needing him to. Here's what I want you to take from this. The man everyone feared in that room was never the most powerful person in it. The most powerful person was the woman who'd learned to stop being afraid of herself. Do-hyun Seo didn't save Imani. He handed her tools and got out of the way, and she built her own salvation, brick by brick, ledger by ledger, boundary by boundary. The dangerous man's greatest act of love was refusing to rescue her. So I'll ask you again what I asked at the start. Who taught you that your needs were a burden? Whoever it was, they were wrong. Your worth was never theirs to decide. It isn't your ex's, your family's, your boss's, or anyone's who's ever made you feel like too much. Too much is just the word small people use for a person who finally took up the right amount of space. If this story moved you, do 3 things for me. Drop a comment and tell me about the moment you stopped making yourself small. I read every single one, and they matter to me more than you know. Share this with one person who needs to hear that they were never the burden. And subscribe, because every week I'm here telling stories about people who got themselves back. Because that's the real ending. Imani Okafor didn't get a fairy tale. There was no white knight, no rescue, no man who fixed her life. She got something better. She got herself back.